Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to do a pretty quick session here and try to get into some, pretty actionable insights on what we can do here as an industry around CTV. Obviously, the holiday season is coming up, and everyone is expecting it to be pretty busy in the media world. And I'm happy to be joined by two old friends and colleagues for quite a long time here. Allison Brown, who's one of our hosts today, heads up Advanced TV and AnalyticsIQ, and Tyler Fitch, who since the early days at Tubi really introduced programmatic into an AVOD environment. I remember when we were sharing a colo office space in San Francisco back in the early days. So it's good to be here. I guess I can let each of you introduce yourself real quickly on sort of what you do, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. I'll start off. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Brown, head of Advanced TV at AnalyticsIQ. And my role is really to help familiarize the space with AnalyticsIQ's data and how we can help with CTV strategies.
And I'm Tyler Fitch. I am the VP of Advertising Partnerships at Tubi. It's a pretty broad term, but one of the things, or a couple of the things that I do is I run the Advanced TV team here at Tubi, as well as handle all the advertising tech partnerships on our platform.
Perfect. And I'm Jay Prasad from LiveRamp. I lead the TV business here. And for us, that is sort of an all-encompassing area where we're going to talk about a bunch of opportunities and identity around third-party data, how big platforms such as Tubi are taking advantage of all this. And I guess we're fortunate enough to be in the middle of the industry, so we get to work with everyone, which is great. All right, we'll dive in. So backdrop of this first, did want to remind everyone that this is, of course, an interactive session. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and we will save some time here at the end to go over that. Answer as many questions as we can. So much is being said about the role of identity and what that means. A lot of this identity discussion has been around the replacement of the cookie and how more of the open web has to deal with these issues. CTV is a bit different because it was never reliant on cookies. And I guess to the benefit of the industry overall, CTV isn't necessarily reliant on gatekeepers that can make policy decisions that force everyone to make lots of radical changes. This is, of course, happening in the backdrop where in 2021, production and content companies created 40% more shows than last year. So, even though last year was technically the year of COVID, it looks like we're just on an ever increasing opportunity around content and media consumption for consumers. This creates a lot of great content and a lot of cool opportunities to dive in to see what you want when you want, but it creates more fragmentation, right? So there's this issue of, more platforms, more problems. How do advertisers navigate these things that are changing so quickly, right? Consumer behavior is changing. The importance of privacy and identity is changing. So, Allison, how does your organization take advantage of identity to help advertisers navigate all the fragmentation?
Yeah, so AnalyticsIQ is an offline data creator, meaning all of the data we create is tied to an offline identity of name and address. We feel this is the most stable and consistent identifier to understand attributes and behaviors tied to individuals and households. And while we do have a 95% reach to the US population based on name and address, this isn't a key that most CTV providers can work with. So when it comes to the identity space and connecting with CTV providers, we definitely see the importance of working with a partner such as LiveRamp, such as yourself, who has a very robust identity graph and can help us facilitate the connection between our audience data and the CTV providers.
And Tyler, for you, right, you have an increasing amount of engaged viewers who want to actually give you identity so that they can have more personalized experiences. But Tubi's also been low friction, right? Like how quickly can you get to the viewing? How do you feel this is working with advertisers?
I mean, it's been great. I mean, you've seen the growth over the past almost 6 years now of CTV, and just seeing the evolution of the data ecosystem within TV is leaps and bounds better than it was 5 years ago, and really removing the idea of the one-to-one cookie or the one-to-one made, but also now having that idea of the household and using LiveRamp as that connective tissue to tell that story of the household. And how do we decide outside of the context, what other data can we layer on to that user and on the biggest screen in the house, as we've gone from a single viewing experience or a single user experience on web and mobile to now the household.
Right, absolutely, right. It's addressability, but because it's the big screen, you have to understand that it's a household and not just an individual, and trying to understand which individuals and devices are within a household and keep that consistent, right, is something that we all have to keep working on together. So the other item that I think is interesting is that CTV is supposed to be, right, this very addressable advertising medium, but as the rush of marketers wanting to get in on the space, do you think there's been a lot of the sort of use of the easy button, like as long as I'm in there, I'm good? Or are we seeing advertisers want to start leveraging third-party data sets to try to parse their media plans into audience buckets instead of just, hey, I'm just going to be on the channels. I'm just going to try to reach the demos I was reaching in TV and correlate it somehow into CTV. Allison, how do you think that's playing out with third-party data and versus the easy button?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say for the clients that we work with, we're definitely seeing more of a trend of custom audiences. We create a lot of custom audiences. We have a very extensive and unique data set as it is just off the shelf, but we really aim to fill gaps in the marketplace. And I think sometimes our clients will look at our taxonomy and it gets their wheels turning, and they'll be like, wow, that's really unique. However, I'm trying to get at XYZ audience. Is that something you think you could ever do? And we really love getting these requests, especially our chief strategy officer. He will say on every single call, I love talking about data. Anytime you want to talk about data, let's talk. And so we always, when we get these custom requests, we most of the time find that we can build a custom audience with the data we have in-house. And if we can't, we will, kind of analyze whether or not this is a gap in the marketplace and if we should create it. And if so, we'll look to do so with our next quarterly build.
Tyler, Tubi had a very outstanding upfront, I guess, 3x the year before, right? So it's exponentially growing how much commitment you can get from advertisers. With that kind of commitment and still a robust sort of marketplace for programmatic, how do you see third-party data and other targeting playing into how you want to deliver?
Well, I think Tubi's in a very good position where we own our own ad tech. We started as an ad tech company first. So it's really, and this is what we stress on my team, is just having that conversation around KPIs with each advertiser and what they're really looking to get. And so we've really leaned in on the programmatic side with some of our partnerships with the DSPs and LiveRamp, but we're also looking at measurement across the portfolio, and how do we prove that our advertisers are hitting the audiences they want, and data targeting is a major piece of it. And whether it's through the programmatic channels or with direct, we're able to do that in a way that really, I mean, you talked about addressable. Is like, what is the definition of addressable now? Previously, it was just email and a credit card tied to a set-top box, and that was a huge premium that was charged for. But CTV really offers that type of scale and addressability on a data targeting kind of shift from that one-to-one email. But we have that, and we've leaned in with LiveRamp in ATS too, and that we announced a few months ago, is we're offering the best of both worlds when they can provide scale, but also that addressability factor that digital TV provides that you can see, and being able to tie it back to a data company like AnalyticsIQ in an addressable fashion.
Right. So you're seeing basically the transition from where the upfronts were really around committing to primetime schedules, locking in your sports, special tentpole events, to even when you now get these commitments in the digital TV world, as you said, understanding who the audience is beyond who viewed certain shows or is tuning into live streaming is something that advertisers now are expecting. So the things that people on this call or listening in probably do on a day-to-day basis is really now not just a part of the buy per se, but it's almost a strategy across the entire strategy between a brand and a big platform.
Yeah, and I think we're also providing the flexibility to measure too, using folks like LiveRamp. So what happened after an exposure? So it's just not that targeting, but we are giving that flexibility and the openness of CTV to really feel comfortable spending those dollars and targeting those audiences, and then measure what happened afterwards.
Allison, do you feel like there are some audience segments that tend to come up a lot in terms of what insights advertisers are seeking and how they would look to AnalyticsIQ to help provide that insight? So beyond who viewed, what else about them?
Yeah, probably, besides just understanding the household compilation, definitely understanding, things like discretionary spend and motivational triggers, I think are really big ones that our clients look at. Obviously you need to understand how much discretionary spend a household has and where they're spending it to determine if, they're truly your right target audience.
Move into this idea of cross-channel. So Tyler, obviously Tubi now being a part of Fox, you've got a really broad portfolio of traditional television, digital television. How do you think cross-channel flows for campaigns are affecting advertisers' spend with your joint potential offerings? And how do you help clients understand how to do cross-channel, and what are those reference points?
Yeah, it's, as you mentioned before, it's been really successful being able to sell into the upfront across channels. And I think the most important thing to call out is that the CTV is really a unique audience compared to the traditional linear. And so when we have this offering and the silos of Fox, but each person has a very different, or I wouldn't say different, but unique offering to advertisers, and it's a unique set of people that are viewing this. So it's been really beneficial to have both of us or all of us on those calls, because it is such a unique data set for each person. And now we're able to combine that in one buy and make it easier, because you talk about friction and the easy button here. Like, we're able to go and buy across all these things in one buy instead of trying to separate it out or do anything that way. So the One Fox initiative has been great, and advertisers have really leaned into that, and we've seen a big benefit from going in and providing that cross-platform or cross-channel offering.
So Allison, with the idea that traditional television is still pretty much measured on broad age and demo, and obviously we are in the midst of a transition as an industry to moving to something else. But how do you think you can help advertisers understand an audience that is viewing traditional television, but also maybe parts of the household are viewing streaming and CTV and mobile and digital? How do you help tie together a view of that audience in a way that traditional panels just were never set up to do?
Yeah, so again, going back to kind of how our data is created and what it's tied to, because we are tying our data to the name and address level, we find that to be very stable, and so we're able to keep track of that, right? So we don't always have we're not dealing with cookies, and, you know, even MAIDs and IPs are not going to be as stable as the name and address level. So we are able to kind of track those things across media channels. And I think just also helping our advertisers or our clients understand the benefits of CTV and what it can provide to them versus perhaps, you know, their other media. You know, CTV makes sense for nearly all advertisers, whereas, you know, there's some media channels that will not make sense for them. You know, and if they play heavy in digital right now, knowing, like, communicating with them that they can use that same target audience on CTV. So it should, you know, they can apply that same target that they have been targeting all along in digital over to CTV, and it should make things, you know, less intimidating for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that we see is because we can look at exposure, right? And the data plus math platform that LiveRamp has, we can look at all the linear exposure happening across set-top boxes and smart TVs. We can look at the exposure coming in through Tubi and other, you know, digital CTV ad serving platforms and direct from distribution platforms, right? Like a Roku or a Vizio smart TV. And if you take a look at all those exposures and then looked at an AnalyticsIQ audience set against that exposure, you would now have a cross-channel view of audience, right? So that would be a smarter way to look at what you're doing in traditional television or even other digital media alongside what you're doing in CTV and digital video, and start to see patterns of audiences where, once again, like siloed age and gender panels don't give you that view, right? So cross-channel is about targeting, but it's just as much about an understanding of who you're reaching. And then, like, as you mentioned, Tyler, the same show on Fox versus the same show on Tubi is probably reaching a much different audience, but you have to sort of have an understanding of that. And that way you can go back to work with your advertisers and help them understand that it's the same show, but you're reaching two audiences. So you almost now need two strategies, and it's not about the show, it's about the audience, right? And having measurement to be able to back that up.
Yeah, I think the most important thing now is that CTV has the ability to prove it, that we're able to work with platforms to show that it's incremental reach and really prove out that making that spend or that investment in somebody like Tubi is incremental to what they were doing on linear already.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how fast this has come at us, but we're all ready for it, and it's happening now. So that's good news for all the advertisers. So we also talked about the trend earlier on, right? And we've been really trying to focus on, you know, really good examples of data that can really help unlock value or new experiences for advertisers, right? Where they might not have gone before. You know, we also talked about how age and gender doesn't really scale into this world in the same way, or you're kind of selling the medium short if that's what you're focused on. You know, Allison, what are some specific audiences that you see working really well? And, you know, it might not be like we need the world of 100,000 segments like, you know, in traditional programmatic, but, you know, a more curated experience. Like what do you see working well, and what's a cool idea?
Yeah, so I think, you know, with the holiday season upon us, you know, and gift buying and, you know, possibly some challenges this season with, you know, inventory, understanding how people buy and what their motivational triggers are is going to be really helpful. You know, if you are waiting to the last second and to buy, and understanding that those are very spontaneous buyers that maybe don't put a lot of thought into it, versus, you know, if you are trying to reach deal seekers who are, you know, always have to have the best deal and can't pass up a great opportunity or a limited time, versus maybe someone like your, you know, we have a segment called loyal customers, and they're not necessarily tied to a specific brand, but they're very thorough with their purchase decisions. They're going to research, they're going to take time to think about it. So I think maybe applying some of those to your holiday campaigns would be really beneficial in understanding, you know, what type of person, what type of motivational triggers they're going to react to.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about how you can look at all of these various groups of shoppers, and instead of just saying shoppers, you can get more granular than that. And you're still, you're creating these audience personas, obviously in an anonymized way, but we can actually make that all work together and end up finding those audiences right on Tubi. So Tyler, there's a lot of also interesting opportunities in CTV that are hard to replicate in traditional TV, in and around creative execution, dynamic creative, more personalized ads that go along with the segmentation. Are you seeing experimentation start to move more in that area?
I mean, definitely the flexibility is there compared to linear. There are still some hurdles, I would say, to true dynamic creative like we know on display or VPaid or anything like that, just with some of the ways people stitch ads together and things like that. But the flexibility is there. I mean, we have the granularity of data to really personalize a campaign for each person, and we're able to execute against that easily and at scale, which I think is another big thing now, is that we've grown so much that we are starting to rival some of the bigger linear buys and primetime buys now. So it's definitely there. There's still a long way to go. That's why I'm still in the business, as CTV is always growing and changing and getting better and better. And the opportunity is there to take it even a step farther.
Right. So you can see an example of using a more granular AnalyticsIQ audience segment, like looking at shoppers a little bit differently, and then having the creative execution against an impression from that audience target be different from another one, right? Maybe it's about a retail locator type of creative unit, or something where you can actually click to design a product or something like that. So those days of making, that's not pie in the sky anymore, right? It's really about execution and articulating the business value to the advertiser. But those types of really next level thinking for execution is here.
Yeah, I mean, the creative for CTV compared to linear is definitely something that everybody is working on, and it's fairly easy to do now, and a lot of companies are focused on it. I think there's so much opportunity here, but it's also just about the scale of data and being able to have that dynamic abilities of what we have now compared to what you can do on linear buys. I think really sets us apart from what they're doing on traditional linear.
Yeah, almost like a pre-prediction here. I mean, we're seeing agencies that have come up to really serve direct-to-consumer advertisers, where they really want to do a lot of creative testing. So instead of like one big creative strategy, right, that like a traditional financial service or an insurance company might do, they are running lots of different versions of creative and testing them against audiences, and then making decisions about creative that they want to keep building based on that, right? Which is really kind of bringing some of the muscles from the digital world into CTV, but these ads are sight, sound, and motion, not banner and display. So that's pretty interesting way that we see things coming.
Yeah, and the direct consumer over the past 2 years, the growth that we've seen there is huge, and especially I think over the past few months with iPhone changes and things like that, and some of the targeting going away on cookie lists and opted out traffic. I think we are seeing those buckets of, and I think gaming is going to be huge, direct to consumer. All these things are going to be jumping into a TV the way they've never done before, and it's already happening.
So one of the things that often drives behavior in markets is the fear of missing out, right? The FOMO, that all the actions happening on CTV. I think you brought up like different versions of gaming, right? All of a sudden now everyone's talking about metaverses. How much do you think the opportunity cost is if an advertiser isn't really all the way in a significant budget perspective in CTV, going into this holiday season and next year? What are they missing out on? How much is potentially at risk here for them?
Well, that's the thing. It's on us to prove that that direct consumer and performance-based advertising is working. And if we are out there and we can prove that they're seeing positive ROI for their buys, I mean, that's when you see money really flow in. And that's why Facebook and Google are so big. They provide that feedback to those advertisers of how much they're making and telling them how much we're making. And now we have the same opportunity with addressable and data targeting and household level targeting, that we can go and prove out that that money is working or coming back and doing that. So
closing the loop, right? Bringing
Yeah.
actual return on ad spend in the form of attribution and other engagement metrics to show that this isn't just the top of the funnel. It can actually work all the way through.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Allison? If someone's not diving in with data into CTV, how much if they keep too much of their budget still focused on traditional linear in a demo fashion?
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't, if you are still unaware of the consumer habits shifting over the last 18 months, I don't know, you must be living under a rock or something. If you're not shifting your media spend to follow where the consumers, eyeballs are going and where they're spending their time, then you're definitely missing out, right? And you're giving that opportunity to another brand who is probably your competitor. And, what is that going to net out at? It's probably going to net out at, lower sales for you and awareness. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge risk in brands not adjusting their media spend to account for the rise of CTV.
Yeah, I guess, my point on this would be that, in a world where it's harder to generate, traditional ratings, viewing is at an all-time high. But if your audience, as we discussed earlier, is perhaps a younger audience and they're on CTV and you're thinking you're reaching them in traditional linear, but your competitor is up there buying that audience, you definitely run the risk of losing market share, right? So that's a reason to have FOMO. Well, we're about at time, so there's a couple of questions here. I'll give this one to Tyler. What advice would you give someone interested in leveraging CTV for the first time? Back to the easy button. How would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different than your buys. You got to think about creative is going to be a huge one for you, and measurement is the other thing that I really would say is really important, and having the correct measurement and being able to look at your different buys and optimize across those buys for performance. As I said, like, creative is another huge issue that it's for the first time to really jump in, is how do you get the right TV commercial to drive performance for you. But really it is measure. I mean, I'm maybe a little self-serving, but I would say spend more and measure more. But for me, that's how I would go about a TV campaign.
Right. And if you're an advertiser who's already buying digitally, you can now pretty much mimic what you would do in a digital buy and actually buy CTV, right? I mean, all three of us work together specifically to make that easier, right? Grab an audience segment, have it be able to be matched so that Tubi can forecast it and then come back with a campaign plan, right? So,
yeah, and if that audience works for you, they can go with somebody like AnalyticsIQ and pick up those segments and target them right out of the box and hit those users that they're used to buying other places. So all that ability to target like you would on a Facebook or a Google, it is there on CTV.
Right. And one of the questions is, how do we all work together? I think you just kind of laid it out, right? First time advertiser wants to get some granular audiences from AnalyticsIQ. You can grab that, right, from our data marketplace. We maintain, right, that identity graph between AnalyticsIQ and Tubi. So that would allow you to understand the reach of that audience segment. And then, right, you can execute it programmatically, Tyler, and you're off to the races. And then you got some measurement on the back end. One last question here is, how do you feel that nonprofits leverage CTV to support fundraising or other goals in that space? Tyler, you probably got some examples here that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with multiple nonprofits to drive awareness for them. I don't know what the best process is or where that goes from, but it is a possibility, and is available if you talk to the right people. But who those people are, who knows? But I mean, we are there, and we are looking at all advertisers that want to support fundraising. But as I said, it is the measurement part and seeing if those dollars are working for you.
Right. As a nonprofit, perhaps, right, you're going to want to start smaller, test it, see what's working well, actually measure what's pulling through in actual donations or engagement, and then make your future decisions from that. So much the same advice you would give, but perhaps, right, just a little bit more guardrails to ensure the budget's being spent effectively. Well, I think that is it. I don't think we have any more questions. So went fast, but I think we covered a lot of ground. So a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Good luck this holiday season to everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.